All right there. Well, after a catastrophic failure of Google Hangouts, I was unable to record the original live stream at the time I wanted to. So what I'm doing here is I'm just recording basically everything again, uh, or well, I guess from the beginning. It's still going to be about 45 minutes to an hour long. There just won't be a Q&A at the end, unfortunately, because it's not live. But I wanted to kind of still have the workshop so that people could take advantage of what I was going to talk about, and then, ask any questions in the comments and things like that, so that we can, start more of a dialogue. Again, I apologize. It was just a very unfortunate technical issue that prevented me from actually streaming this, but I am able to record it, so that's what I'm going to do. So, anyway, this is Architecture Resume Fundamentals, and it's a workshop Wednesday. And basically, what that means is that these are meant to be brief and informative sessions to help evolve your architectural career. You know, I hope that you enjoy this, and it's basically brought to you by AIA, American Institute of Architects, Buffalo, Western New York chapter, Emerging Professionals, and Evolving Architect. Evolving Architect is my personal blog, and basically, in conjunction with AIA Buffalo, Western New York Emerging Professionals, I'm bringing this to you just on a regular basis to discuss all sorts of topics from ARE to SketchUp to now professional development and more specifically resumes. And the next month is portfolios. So who am I? I'm Michael Valley. I'm a registered architect and a lead AP, and as I just mentioned, I have a blog, Evolving Architect, and I've been writing and sort of trying to dialogue with emerging professionals and architects of all kinds to, just help others through what, my experiences have been to evolve their own careers and at the same time evolve mine. So I'm trying to teach and pass on and mentor other people and also uh, sort of experiment with certain things and um, figure out things myself so that I can teach even more. So, what's today about? If you know you're in the right place, if you want to know why it's important to have a high quality resume and how they're structured, you're looking for your first job, to change jobs, or to start a new academic program, or you're just awesome and want to know everything about resumes so you can go off and create your own. So, like I said, this is Architecture Resume Fundamentals, and here we go. So, what is a resume? A resume is a written, according to Bo Bennett, a written exaggeration of only the good things a person has done in the past, as well as a wish list of the qualities a person would like to have. And I like quotes like this because there is some sort of truth to that. I mean, we're going to talk about all the sorts of things that you can, all the pitfalls and all the good things that you can do with your resume to really showcase who you are. But at the end of the day, some people can get a little bit overzealous and start to add things into the resume that, you know, really weren't what they said they were, but they put them in there because they're trying to put their best foot forward. And sometimes exaggeration takes hold, and I think it's a very common thing to happen with a resume. So, what is a resume? I mean, we should probably know what it is before we start talking about it, right? So, in my own words, a resume is a brief synopsis to convince someone you're qualified for the next round of evaluation. And in most cases, that's typically an interview. Sometimes, as I had mentioned before, it can be an academic sort of situation where you're really trying to basically include your resume or curriculum vitae, which is more of like the academic version of a resume, specifically for academics. There are this whole workshop though is really going to focus a little bit more on what it means just to have a resume in general, but we will touch on sort of the most important things that probably apply to both kinds of resumes, the job and the academic. Um, but this is really what a resume is. It's just a synopsis of who you are so that somebody can take a glance at this sheet that you've given them, a one-page sheet usually, and they can very quickly say, okay, well, this person's really qualified. I think I'm going to bring them in for an interview. It allows them to sort of gauge very quickly when, especially if it's a human resources person or the first line of defense, I guess, and they're looking at just a pack, a stack of a pack, a stack, a pile of pack, a stack, a pile of of all these resumes. People sending them from all over, and you know, yours is just another piece of paper that somebody has to go through. So you need to make sure, and this is sort of going to be the theme throughout, that you're telling your story and you're doing it in such a way that's very captivating so that the person on the other end sees it quickly, can understand it, and wants you to come in because they think you're potentially a good fit for whatever that position is. So first, we have to really talk about what the basic structure is of a resume, right? So there are a few things that are just really required. You should probably write your name on the resume. I don't think that'll be too complicated. And your contact info. I think some people don't necessarily always put the contact info, or they don't put the right kind of contact info. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But these are, if you don't put these on here, then there's almost no point in sending this at all because nobody will even be able to find you. So those are the most important, but don't make them too important in terms of graphics. Just, I mean that if the information isn't there, it's impossible for you to get the job. So the next one is education. And along with education, in terms of education, if you're a student looking at going to an undergrad program, then you're going to be looking at your high school education. If you're a recent grad, or just basically a recent grad from a college or more, you'll be using your college education and describing the things that you did at school. The next thing is the work experience. And this is, I shouldn't say work experience, it's experience in general. However, it's meant to be your practical experience that relates directly to that job or to whatever you are looking at in terms of why you're even doing the resume. And I'd say that there's also so if those top four are the primary ones, the sort of bonus one is skills and interests. And I think a lot of people take this for granted. However, the skills and interests can be a very powerful way for you to set yourself apart because in a lot of cases, you will go up against people that have a name, they have contact info, so those are sort of negated. Although you could have really funky contact info. Um, you know, don't use, just as a side note, don't use an email or something like that that will, embarrass you or somebody else who reads it. Um, you know, if you made a weird sounding Gmail account when you were in middle school and you're still using it, you probably should at least try to get another account just for this so that Somebody is sending it to your name at Gmail or AOL or wherever, excuse me, and they can just, they don't have to be embarrassed to contact you. It's a very big red flag that you aren't as professional as you should be. So skills and interests, I think, is really a, just to get back to that, is sort of that X factor. It's the thing that sets you apart because most people have different kinds of skills and interests than other people. And those skills and interests can offset the things that you might have deficits in for the education and experience. So if we look back at these five and we break them into sort of tiers or chunks of categories, the top two are the must-haves, and so are education experience, but they're sort of grouped together as well in a different kind of grouping. Skills and interests are kind of the bonus. And the thing I'd like to say about the education experience is depending on where you are in your experience, it might make more sense to have education sort of towards the top. And if you think about the way that this is laid out on the screen right now, this is pretty much the way that you could just fundamentally set up your resume. Name, contact info, just keep going down the line of these in terms of what your importance is, because people read from top to bottom uh, in in the U.S. So you're going to want to tailor that to the person who's reading it, right? So the education and experience then is tailored to you because if you haven't gotten much experience, the thing that you want to show very strong is your education. So maybe you talk about the extracurricular things you did in the education, or you really emphasize that, and that goes first, versus the experience, which kind of comes later. Maybe you've had some jobs, but it's not as strong as it could be. So then the experience would be down there. But on the flip side, if you have a little bit more experience, like I have been out of school for it's getting close to a decade now, and I have now started to move into the sort of early mid part of my career, and I am starting to see that my experience is outweighing the kind of things that I did in my education. I'm doing more things in the firms that I've worked at. I have more responsibilities, and so in that case, my experience is actually starting to outweigh the education. My skills and interests are sort of there also as an extra piece, but in my case, the experience is starting to outweigh the education. And maybe it is for you, maybe it isn't. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's just the important thing is to make sure that the most important thing for you in terms of your strengths goes towards the top. Skills and interests, I think, can go towards the bottom regardless because it's it's recommended, but it's not a requirement. It's just something to help the person understand who you are and do so very quickly. So there are other things that sort of supplement a basic structure for a resume. These would be different pages, other things, supplementary documents entirely. Bio, when I say that, biography or introduction or something like that, it could be a separate thing, especially if it's more academic. You might want to have some sort of bio that describes who you are, what you're doing, etc. Sample page, especially in architecture, so this is about architecture resumes, that's something that stands apart from other trades is, architects are designers and creatives and they have projects and usually there's some sort of photography or drawings or things like that that really, you know, showcase the kinds of things that you've done, right? So sample pages are kind of a norm to add behind the resume. So these are just other things, but I just want you to understand that they're not necessarily part of the resume. They are their own things, and depending on what the person is requiring of you, you may or may not actually even need them. You might choose to include them just because they seem to make sense to you, but they're not necessarily things that you have to include. Um, Again, so if we go back to the basic structure, name, contact info, whichever one is more important, education or experience, skills and interests, we're talking about things like volunteering, or maybe you know a certain kind of software, or something, potentially depending on what the job is or what the position is, you could start talking about sports or things like that, but I wouldn't necessarily go for those unless it's something that you've done and either excelled at or you've been doing a long time. For example, if you are very much into soccer, for example, but maybe you're not an all-star, but I, for example, have played soccer for a while. I mean, I stopped for several years, but I used to play it in high school and middle school, and now I played it a little bit in college, and that was something that as I got out of college, I started to, really put as one of my interests because it spoke to the fact that I had some consistency with that, but um, I also had something that said to an employer, hey, this person likes to be physically fit. This person, I won't have to worry about them as much because they take care of themselves and they have interests that keep them energized, keep them active, and keep them moving. So things like that could speak to who you are in a way that's appropriate for a professional position or academia. But I'd just be careful that sometimes your interests don't necessarily mean every little thing. You just have to be sort of picky about what you're telling people, not because you shouldn't on a general basis, but because for the very short window that you have of this person's attention who's looking at this, who's the sort of the gatekeeper, you need to make sure that they are fully satisfied with the fact that you are experienced, the right person for the position, and that they should bring you in for an interview. And that is your focus. So if it seems like it's just extra information, don't include it. It's not going to help you. It's actually going to make it the message muddier, and it's going to be something that will probably get you just thrown back into the pile or have the resume thrown in the trash. So, like I said, it's really important to tell your story. Note things that make you particularly qualified while balancing standard conventions. This is important because you want to stand out in a way where you are celebrated a little bit and where you make it very clear that you are a good fit for the position. But at the same time, you can't go too far out of the standard conventions that we'll talk about, either graphically or in terms of the composition or the structure that we just mentioned, because you have to think about it from the other person's point of view. If the person from human resources is a person from human resources in many cases, or if it's a partner or an upper management person who works at the firm, they might be an architect, they might be a designer, they might not be. And you have to sort of be able, your resume has to be able to stand some sort of basic criticism from any level at a firm, or if it's academic, at a university. So you need to maintain some of the standard conventions. You can break one or two, but don't break too many, or somebody won't even know what they're looking at. And I'll show examples later about what kinds of things that uh, you can do or avoid to make sure that you're standing out, but just enough and not too much. Water break. Um, Someone is looking to hire you based on both your experience and your personality. That's important because I think, especially if the firm is looking for someone who is going to fit their team particularly well, and it's not just about getting the right experience. Some people can rub other people the wrong way, and you don't want to be that person. You want to be someone who comes off in their resume and their written work as somebody who is a team player and maybe not even that cliche, but just somebody who is a good fit for whatever that firm is. Maybe the firm doesn't care what your personality is like, and they just want you to do the job and do it well. That could be, but in many cases, because it's such a cost for a firm to train you, to give you benefits, to um, pay you on a regular basis a fair salary. There are so many things that a firm has to do that they would, in most cases, as long as you are doing your job and doing it well, if they hire you, they would prefer that you just stay there forever because you have been trained and you become a part of the system in such a way where it's harder to replace you because you know so much about the inner workings and the way things are done and the standards and things like that. And you just need to make sure that the position you're looking at, check out their website, check out the way that they word the proposal or the ad or wherever you found the opportunity. Or somebody, honestly, it's even better to talk to somebody you know who directly already works there. Get an idea of what the experience is like and how you can tailor your stuff to um, basically what will work for that firm may not work for you. So if you find that you're uncomfortable in that process and you can't really bring yourself to edit it more, um, just to just because that's what they want to hear, then don't do that because you need to find a place that you want to be longer term too because it's tough to switch between jobs and it's not something you need to do all the time and you probably shouldn't. So it's just as much of a selection process for you to them as it is for them to you. So just briefly touching on each of the pieces. Education. You know, are you did you go to an Ivy League school? Did you go to a local school? Did you go to is it public, private? Is it something that um, the person who's reviewing this resume will recognize? And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of something that's well known or a name, but are they an alumnus? Are they someone who will care that you went to school X, for example? Um, you know, it's been an advantage for me to have gone to a more well-known school, but it's probably been more of an advantage that the people that I was interviewing with in many cases were alumni of that school. So you want to make those connections. You want people to think and to understand that you're the kind of person that's like them. As much as you can make that human connection, the better your chances are going to be. If, for example, you just left from the same school, you just graduated, of the person who owns the firm that you're trying to get a job at, and that's the first thing they see at the top of your resume, that's going to be really good for you because it's a connection that is made with, they don't even have to talk to you. You could just be, there's a familiarity there. They've gone through similar experiences that you have because you went to the same school, because you know the same professors potentially, because you got your education the same way, and that's very powerful. The other thing to think about when you're talking about your education portion of the resume is what are the awards that you've won? What are the special things that you did while you were in school? Are you thinking about all of the sort of extracurriculars that you did? Are you including those in the resume or not? If there's too many, maybe it's going to look like you're just peacocking and you're just being a little bit arrogant about it. But maybe it's just what you need to present yourself in such a way that if you don't have a lot of experience, maybe overloading the education portion is what you need to do to say, I'm a well-rounded person, I care about my job, and I care about working somewhere that is going to help me grow and foster my career. So those are the kinds of things that you can do, especially if you're a recent grad or you're a student and you're looking for your first job. That's important. In terms of education for like an academic position or to go to grad school, you need to make sure that you are trying to pair things in ways that work for whatever that program is that you're looking for. Like if you are trying to go to a specific grad school that focuses on urban design, you're going to want to make sure that you emphasize things like that in your undergraduate degrees, sort of portion of that resume, so that the people on the other end say, oh, yeah, they must have taken an interest in this because they entered a competition to design, a city on an island, or, it could be anything, but as long as it relates sort of to whatever that other thing is, those are, again, it's all about connections. It's about creating connections with the person who has never met you, probably. The person who you don't know, they don't know you, and they're looking for some way to understand who you are very quickly. Did you, I don't know, do you have anything that you've done, like going abroad? I would mention that. Do you know any languages, or did you learn languages to go abroad? Many undergrad or and graduate programs in the U.S. have 4 and 5 year programs, and one of those years could be, or a semester could be abroad in Italy or um, England or a whole other slew of places. And what did you get out of that? Is there something that's special about that happened, or you know, what are your experiences that make you unique? And even though there are a lot of abroad programs, I would say it's still important because it shows that you're quote worldly. You're doing something that is getting you out and seeing more than just your normal settings. And especially people who have done that before really appreciate that. So that's something to think about. Are you an all-star student? You should think about the fact that college, as much as we would like to think it is just to find ourselves and to party, it's also a time that you can really, even if you weren't a good student necessarily in high school, you could be an awesome student in college because you're really applying yourself in something that you love. Hopefully, you love what you do and you love architecture, or you like architecture at least. But if you can get your grade point average to something that's, are you on the dean's list? Did you get some sort of scholarship because you have some sort of academic, you know, advantage or something like that has brought you to where you are? Things like that. So that takes care of education. And now we get to experience. So what are the kinds of things that, really set you apart in terms of your experience? I'll give you an example. So I, especially when you start working, and you're working for a firm right out of the gate, right out of school, you will typically not get the best experience that you possibly can, and that's not something negative against the firm necessarily. It is just that because you don't have enough experience, a firm in many cases is leery to give you too much responsibility and will typically use you to help draft or with administration type things, or things that are easy to task oriented things, I guess. Things that you can begin to naturally learn over time, but they aren't things with multiple tiers and levels of responsibility to them. They are simply go draw wall elevation X, go look at building section Y, you know, pull these images together, make a rendering, do stuff that you probably were already doing in school, because it's trying to ease you into the experience of being in a firm. So The thing that I did this is sort of a tip to kind of building up your resume, is enter a competition. Design competitions are everywhere. You can go to all sorts of sites. If you just Google architecture competition, I bet 100 will show up in your feed, and you can just look for things that interest you. If you are thinking about this more long term, try to see, well, what are the things that I could learn from, whether it's a new program, software program, a new program type, like building type, or um, what are the things that are going to really help, or new technology? If you have never used a 3D printer, but there's an opportunity to enter a competition to use a 3D printer, that could be something interesting, especially if you wanted to develop more skills in school and you have access to something like that. It's not something that everybody's doing yet, and it could really set you apart in the way that it's going to pop off the page. It's going to be something that not everybody has seen, and you can just say, "Hey, I did this." It's yours. And I think that's the clear distinction, especially when you're just starting out, is that when you have experience in not well, you don't really have experience. It's tough to um, it's tough to even in many cases, like the firm won't necessarily let you take just any images you want from things that you've made while you're there. Some are more gracious than others, and some will let you take those things for reference in portfolios or resumes or things like that, or sample pages, I mean. But not everybody will. You can't just claim because there are laws that prevent you from stealing uh, intellectual property. You can't just take something that you've created from a firm with you. So one of the reasons why I entered competitions is because that is mine. When I did those, they were ways for me to expand my own experience in a very distinctive way. I would learn a software program for that purpose, or I would learn something that would help me, that I knew would help me down the road. And several competitions later, it was also partially because I just wanted to design more, and I wanted that sort of sense that I had in the studio because I loved it. And that's what spoke to me. Is there something else like that that could speak to you? Whether it doesn't even have to be competitions, but what are the things that are going to set you apart, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, that can help you kind of fill out that portion of the resume, right? So another example would be if you don't have a lot of work experience, but you have volunteer experience and it's experience specifically with construction or things of that nature. The perfect example I can think of is Habitat for Humanity. And while I'm not necessarily straight endorsing them here, what I mean is that it's something that, and I do love Habitat for Humanity because it's something that I was a volunteer with for a couple of years, and on another portion of the volunteering side, but you know, being able to help somebody build their home is a set of very practical skills that you can have, especially because you're likely, especially coming out of school, you're not going to have a home in terms of one that you're buying yourself and something you're fixing up, probably. Um, but you're this is your opportunity to learn more about residential architecture, possibly, or and give back at the same time. So it shows two sides. It shows that you are willing to go above and beyond and take that extra step with your time, and it also shows that you are using that time in a way that is helping your knowledge of construction, which is amazing, especially for somebody right out of college. So that's that kind of experience. The other kind of experience is what are you doing on a day to day when you're in a firm? Are you maybe a little higher and you're than just a drafter out of college? Excuse me. Are you a registered architect? Do you have experience that crosses several projects? Are you the kind of person who has managed projects before? Are you managing people? Are you trying to better the firm in ways that are above and beyond just the drawing to drawing? You are overseeing a lot of things, or you saw a project from beginning to end. That is huge. I mean, I've had only a few major projects in my career so far, but they've spanned so much time that I've learned so much over the course of time through just a handful of projects. And those projects speak in many ways far more volumes than having 35 little projects that meant nothing. What are your advantages like that that you can speak to and describe very briefly, um, not necessarily in complete sentence structure, because in a resume it's almost like bullet points that are not necessarily fragments, but they are paraphrased statements that will fit neatly on the resume format that we're creating here. So those are the kinds of things to think about. What are your things in your experiences that you can sort of speak to that will go above and beyond? And whatever that is, try to describe it in a way that is not exaggerating, it's truthful, but it's also positive. You know, don't exaggerate, but don't just make it really, really boring either. I mean, if if it's too boring or if it's too, um, I guess, run of the mill or something like that, it might be okay because um, the overall composition of your resume might sort of make up for that. But having just experience blank isn't what you want to do. You want to make sure you have something there, and if you don't have experience, go get some. Just go get some really quickly, whatever that means. Skills and interests. So, in terms of, we talked a little bit about the possibility of having things like health interests, you know, playing sports or doing things like that. But are you a woodworker? You know, do you build things on your own they might have nothing to do with architecture? Is it furniture? Are you, um, you know, this is a very random example, but I used to be a print monitor at a plot lab when I was at school, and I know a lot about printers just because I had to change the printers and really understand how the computers connected to the printers. And it might sound like a stupid thing, but I don't have to think about that much anymore. I just know how the computers connect to things at the firm that I work at now. Uh, sometimes things go down, and that's out of my control. But the basic building blocks are there, and it might not even be a skill that an employer is looking like, hey, he's a plot monitor, or he's been a plot monitor before. He's going to know everything about printing. I don't think a person at a firm really sits there and looks at the resume and says that, but it's something. It's an extra feature that does work towards my career. It's something that is um, small that I don't have to think about anymore. And the more things that you have like that are like, do you know Revit? Do you know uh, Adobe Creative Suite? What programs in the Creative Suite do you know? Are you familiar with InDesign? Do you know Photoshop? You should know Photoshop. It's one of those programs you just kind of need to know. But what are the drafting programs that you know? Are you an AutoCAD person, a Revit person? Are you a worldly software person who knows everything about everything? I mean, those are the kinds of things that people become BIM managers because they just happen to know Revit more than other people, and they get put into positions of, uh, you know, lots of responsibility just because they know a program better. What are those things that really set you apart again and make people think, oh, well, this is the person I want to go to for this because they know a lot about insert skill basically. Or who the term that gets thrown around my office here a lot is guru. If I was going to go and talk to somebody about um, at the firm that I work at right now, it Vectorworks is the software program. If I need to know something about Vectorworks because I'm not as familiar with Vectorworks as I am AutoCAD or Revit, who do I go to? Well, off the top of my head, I have 3 or 4 people that I know are probably the best people in the office to ask a question about that. You want to be that person for something. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be something that you do day to day in the office, but are you really good at drawing? Are you really good at rendering by hand? Are you really good at making physical models? Are you really good at, um, it could be something that seems really boring, like writing specifications. Are you the best at writing specifications ever? Then you are going to be key in a firm. Are you a person who is really interested in sustainability above and beyond most people? That's sometimes you just fall into these things that become your skills, and you need to understand that those skills, even though they might not directly apply to everything, you can really start to build into your resume the fact that you have these skills and that you can use them even if it's indirectly towards your job or towards this academic thing that you're looking for. So that's skills and interests. So what I want to really get into very briefly is, in my mind, there are, and this is just something that I've come up with after thinking about it a lot, there are universal sort of standards to how you make your resume. And I'm just going to go one by one and talk about it briefly. So the first is spelling and grammar. I cannot tell you how important this is. It might seem really, really stupid, but if you have any, I mean, one spelling error or grammar error, it's over. Like, you don't get a second chance. Somebody will just toss your resume to the side or to the ground or to the floor. Maybe they'll start dancing on it because it's just that bad. It's like the one super horrible thing that you can do, because, and the reason why that is because that speaks volumes to how meticulous you'll be, not only in your job, but if the person is worried that you will make spelling errors or grammar errors in any correspondence, in anything that goes out of the office that represents the firm, that's embarrassing to the firm. And that's where you need to disconnect yourself here and say, wait, if I make these errors, that speaks poorly on me, which will ultimately speak poorly on them. So you need to check this like it's the only thing you ever spell checked. Spell checking it in the program is not good enough. You need to look at it with a fine-tooth comb, go through it. The grammar is different in a resume a little bit because it's a little bit abbreviated or paraphrased in terms of the sentence structure. You're not necessarily writing full sentences, but don't be inconsistent with your grammar. Don't make silly mistakes like using the wrong form of to, T-O-O, T-W-O, T-O. Make sure you're using the right grammar and the right spelling, or it literally is over if you do not follow this first standard. The second one is honesty. You can't over embellish and you can't lie on these, because let's say that you go to the interview because they loved your resume, right? And why wouldn't they? But they loved it so much because you over embellished something that was probably not completely true, and now that's the one thing that they can't stop focusing on. It's basically the cornerstone of everything that they love about you before they even meet you. And if they find out that that's not the right thing, or they find out later, it's really not going to be a good situation for you. You may not get the job, or you just might not be a good fit. If you're lying about how much kind of experience you have, they throw you right in and you can't do the job, that's on you because they thought you could do the job and you lied to them. Honesty is super important. Super, super important. Organization. Your whole resume has to be organized. If it's not organized and it's all messy and things aren't lined up and it's all a mess, then you need to fix that because it needs to be organized and it needs to be clear. Brevity. It needs to be short. It needs to be to the point and concise and very, very streamlined. Consistency. The thing that I think about when I think about consistency is you need to create almost like a systematic approach to your resume. You need to use similar fonts. You need to use similar ways to highlight things, whether it's just using a bold font for this thing, or an italicized font, or maybe possibly an underlined font for something, but be consistent about where and how you use that. So you're not highlighting something like the name of your school that you went to in bold and blue letters, and then you're using green somewhere else, and you're using all sorts of stuff in ways that don't make sense at all, and it's a mess. Don't do that. Just be consistent. In this case, less really is more, and you just need to get to the point and be consistent about how you get to the point. And that speaks to the elegance, the overall sort of simplicity of what you are presenting. We are designers as architects, we are creatives. You need to think about it just in the same way that you can't assume that an architect is going to be looking at your resume and you have to write in such a way where someone who isn't formally trained in architecture can understand it. You also need to be cognizant of the fact that the opposite could happen, and a very particular designer could be looking at your resume, and if it's messy, it could be the end for where you were going to go with that job because it could be very, very important to that person, and it's going to show that you're very professional if it's just very clean and very concise. I love this quote. Actually, I'm 130, but 125 is what I put on my resume because that's what I look like I weigh. Now, this speaks to exactly the problem that I brought up toward the beginning of this conversation. You can't over embellish and you can't fudge things in ways that are just because you felt like it. You know, you really should be as honest as you possibly can while still captivating the person that you're trying to give this to. Because, again, you don't want to give them the wrong idea. It's so much harder to move the ship after you've done that than to just be honest and straightforward and just tell it like it is. You need to be aware of what you're trying to get the job for, how much experience you have, and what kinds of things you can offer. If you're not clear about those things, then you need to find some clarity before you just start spewing out things that sound good, because they will come back to bite you and they will come back to haunt you, and it won't be a good situation. So, with that, I think I just want to go over some really quick do's and don'ts. Then we're going to go into some samples and let you be on your way. So, resume do's and resume don'ts. Do's, follow the guidelines. If somebody is presenting something in a particular way or they have a way where they format that they want you to give your resume to them, follow it. It might supersede some of the things that I'm talking about because it needs to be in a very particular format for them because that's their standard. That's okay. Just try to keep as many of those standards that we talked about in the group of six, as you can. Continue to follow the guidelines, and you'll be fine. Tailor the resume to the position. So you need to, you might have multiple resumes, and this isn't something that I touched on yet, but you might have multiple resumes because if you're applying to a boutique design firm and then you're turning around and applying to uh, I don't know, a developer um, that needs an architect, or you're going to work for the state. You know, you're going to work for, in my case, it would be New York State because that's where I live. But you're going to work for some public institution or public entity. Those are completely different kinds of resumes because they are speaking to different kinds of people. And again, it's all about connection. Every single time, every single move that you are, every gesture that you're making here, you you need to make that connection. And there's subtle connections that you're making the entire time, and you're building sort of a repertoire with the person that you're presenting this to. So note the unique skills or traits that make you you. You know, what are the things that make you special and help you stand out? We've talked about that a lot. Create a print ready resume. I cannot believe we didn't talk about this yet. I'm glad that we're talking about it now. You need to make sure that however you design it, you know, regardless of what if it's a physical submission, what kind of cardstock you're using, what kind of paper, what kind of anything, even if it's digital, you need to make sure that when they get it on their end, all they have to do is literally press print, and it will either show up exactly how you wanted it to, or if it's in color, it will show up in a clearly legible black and white version, which actually gets me to another point, which I used to have color in my resumes. A little bit of splash of color, but I've always had minimalist resumes myself, so I chose not to use too much, but I like having a little bit of a color. The thing that I realized a few years ago, and this is fairly recently in my career, is that there are so many other opportunities to use color, like in your portfolio or another supplementary sheet like we talked about, or in photos or things like that, that you really want, if possible, to not use color in your resume. And the reason I stress that is because if you know that yours prints perfectly black and white, it will print on any printer you can possibly think of. And it won't matter what kind of colors there are. It won't matter if the person even has color toner necessarily. You will know for sure that it will print the way you want it to. Also, if you're exporting your resume from, you know, InDesign or Word or Publisher, know that you need to have the fonts that you choose somehow embedded into that file, because if you're using weird fonts that other computers don't have, just because you thought it was cool one day and you found it on the internet, you're like, oh, this is the best font ever. If they don't have it, it's not going to print right. You're going to get like weird little glyphs and wingdings and things like that that aren't going to make your resume look like garbage. Don't fall into that trap. Make a print-ready resume. Ask other people. Just send it to random people that you know that are willing, you know, family members or friends. Have them print it. Don't give them any other instructions than to print it, look at it, see what happens. Because the person on the other end is not responsible for how you presented your stuff to them. They might make carbon copies of it until the sun comes up. And you can't control that. You just can't control it. So the one thing you can control is that it's print ready. It's print ready on almost anything that you can possibly print on. Be clear. I can't overstate this. We've talked about it a lot. Be very clear. Make sure that your clarity is the thing that people focus on and not not some random error. Resume don'ts. Do not lie or exaggerate. Talked about this a lot It's really, really important. Just don't do it. Don't over stylize. The point is to emphasize language here, not necessarily graphic style. The content is better. It should be the thing that's emphasized over the look of what you're showing here. The look should still be clear and very, elegant if possible, minimalist, slick, whatever you want to whatever word you want to use there. Don't over stylize, and we'll see some examples very shortly. Do not misspell anything. You can't misspell anything. If you do, it's over. I can't stress this enough. If I've ever seen a resume before and I saw a misspelling, it was done for them. I have been able to look at resumes and portfolios of people coming into the firms because the first firm I worked at was very, very small, and I was asked to look at some of those things from time to time. And I will tell you right now that if I was looking at a resume, and because of how many there were, if I ever saw one and I saw a resume with a misspelling, done. It's like done. I don't even, sometimes it's not even worth archiving because you know that there will never be an opportunity for that person again. Sometimes, and I will say this, if the resume is that good, like the best, we're talking about like 95 out of 10 or 99% or like almost 100, besides that one misspelling, I would point it out to whoever was in charge, say, this is what the scenario is, but I think we should potentially still talk to this person. There's one instance where that happened, and it turned out to be fine because then you can say to the person, hey, there's one misspelling, we really love your stuff, but, just so you know. And depending on the reaction, if they are, you need to make sure that if that happens to you, that you are extremely gracious, that you apologize profusely, and that you say that it will never happen again. It is not something that represents you. It was just a simple error, and that it just won't happen again. If it does happen to you, it's unfortunate. It shouldn't happen to you because if you're looking at this as often as I'm telling you to, it won't. But if it does, be very gracious, be apologetic, and it could work out for you anyway. But in 99% of the time, it's instant game over. So don't let it happen to you. Don't write references upon request. This is silly. This is stupid. If somebody's going to ask you for the references, have it ready if you go to an interview as a separate sheet, but don't say that in your resume. It's assumed. It's a standard. You don't need to say references upon request. If I was a person who wanted to see you back, I would request them. I wouldn't just look to see, I don't know. Should we ask for the references? They didn't write references upon request. Oh no. Oh. That's not what would happen. Okay, it's not. They would just ask for them, and that's how it is. So there. Don't use acronyms unless they're very well known. And this goes back to who's your audience. Are you talking to an architect? Are you talking to a person from human resources who doesn't necessarily have an architecture degree? Don't assume. It's just sort of like, I'll give you a point. You don't necessarily know what the AIA is, but I mentioned it at the beginning of the workshop. And the thing there is that it is pretty much an industry standard, but that might not be the case for somebody on the other end. They might not know what the AIA is. So don't assume, if you and that's the last one. Don't make poor assumptions. Try to use your best judgment and try to connect and understand where the other person is coming from that is reviewing your resume. So I just want to follow up with some samples, and we'll look at some examples of what these resumes could be. So here's a very simple one. Uh, in some of these images, I would just say ignore the background. It's really about emphasizing the way the resume is presented, what is presented here. So, there's this is all lorem ipsum, sort of generic uh, writing because it's not a real resume. It's just an example of a composition here. Even though there's color, it's fairly straightforward. There's a little bit of a graphic flourish at the bottom. This person knows some languages potentially, and it breaks it up into very, there's a statement at the top, which you could do, some experience, some education, and then it lists the skills in sort of an interesting, cool way with this dot approach where they really know Photoshop. They don't really know AutoCAD as well, but they know Illustrator really well. You can instantly see that, and I don't have to think about not only what do they know, but how well do they know it. So this is kind of interesting. Um, I hate this resume. I absolutely hate this resume, and I'll tell you why. That angle is too foreign to be in this resume. Sorry, sorry, it's just true. I can't believe that this angle is here. I don't know. I don't know what it's doing there. Apparently, there's a train outside. So if you heard that horn, that's what's going on. Um, it's a cool graphic in some ways, but it's also just way too distracting. All I can see is the angle, and maybe it's illegible anyway. But if you sort of squint your eyes and you look at this, that's the sort of reaction that you're going to have. Is like all I can see is this dark angled line in the middle of the screen, and that's it. And it's driving me nuts right now. I need to turn the page. Go to the next one. This is clear. So this is centering everything along the midline. Things were justified before, but now they're centered and off of a main axis. There's some cutesy little symbols. Uh, this is a case where there's a person's photo, and I really would recommend not having your photo anywhere near this. If you're going to have it somewhere, put it in a biography page, if that's something that they require or something you want to add, because the resume, I think, it's not even a photo that's really helping. It just shows this person with a camera, and I think there's a lot of ways that you could sort of get around this that you don't even need the photo. Like you could take the photo out completely, and it would be way better. Um, the fact that it says CV at the top, it's kind of not a CV. Um, CV is a little bit more in depth, and it talks about things that are like you don't need to call a duck a duck. It just is a duck. Like you don't need to call this. You don't need to brand it resume. It just is a resume. So it should be clear enough, and you don't have to have this symbol at the top that says CV or resume or whatever. So it's simple. There are some issues with it, but overall, it's got some flow to it, and it's fairly straightforward. The green border is driving me a little bit nuts too. So that's if you think about it, and it needs to print anywhere. You can't rely on them fitting to the page, and you can't rely on them printing it to the full scale. So I would actually recommend having almost nothing near your borders in terms of graphics or anything because you don't know if they're going to do full bleed. You don't know if they're going to do anything special. Print ready is important. Here is an interesting one. It's sort of all over the place, which is hard to look at, but it's got the right color style um, because there isn't really any. It's just using gray tones to sort of emphasize different kinds of things. The one thing here though is that there's like too many different graphics and too many different areas going on. And uh, to be fair though, this is for a graphic designer. I'm just showing you another example of how you could lay things out. I mean, the thing to think about when you're just searching for examples uh, and precedents for your own work is that you need to think about sort of like what are the What are the ways that you can take bits and pieces potentially and create what is your resume? Don't just steal somebody else's resume. Just what are the pieces that really work for you? Try to find a font that works in that vein and kind of bring it all together. I think there's a little bit too much going on here, but it's it's all right. Now this one is sort of a better version of whatever that other one was that we just looked at. I'd say that this is clear. It doesn't. You don't need the little WM square thing next to William Mitchell, but it's fine because some of the stuff is all right. I don't think you necessarily really need the little graphic map at the middle bottom, but it's all right. I mean, you get an idea of who this person is. It's fairly clear. You could print it on pretty much anything and it would look fine because it's gray tone. As you can tell, I'm a little bit partial to gray tone right now. Um, but I could see there being a little bit of splash of color if you really want it. Maybe you are making some of the accents a little bit colored, or some of the things that are bolder color. You get a sense of the skills. I think the thing that's tough about the bars and the dots and things with the skills is even though it's a very immediate graphic, who's ever going to say that they have a skill that's like towards the lower end? I mean, it's a little bit deceptive because maybe, for example, this person has skills in InDesign, but their bar, if it was measured next to somebody else's version of that bar, would be completely disproportionate. I mean, what does a full bar mean? That they're like a superstar person at that? It's I don't want to overthink it, but you have to consider those things. Like if everything is graphically similar, then there's not enough contrast for you to really have that oomph and that sort of emphasis that you want on that graphic. So just be careful of that. Okay, so here's a test. If you're still with me here, one of these resumes is just not going to work at all. The other resume is sort of going to work. Based on what I've told you so far, I'm pretty sure you can tell me which one it is. If you pick the one on the left as the one that's horrible, that's right. Please do not print on a black background. It will suck up toner, it will look horrible, and it is the bane of everybody's existence, especially if they have to print several of them. There are potentially several people that will look at these and they will get a copy on their desk, and you need to make sure that you're not just wasting printer ink. Okay, it will drive people crazy. Not naming any names. Maybe I got a little crazy, once because somebody basically sent me something very similar and I couldn't believe it. And it's a, it could rub somebody the wrong way. Is in a way where it's so frustrating that they just throw it out because it's just such a waste. So please don't do that. If you're going to go with something, go for something that's a little bit closer on the right. You could use the columns. There's a little bit going on too much at the in the bottom left corner, and it's getting a little bit close to what I would say you want to have. You want to have about a half an inch to an inch margin around the whole thing. Even at the top left corner, you're getting a little bit too close to the edge, and you just want to be careful that you're not cutting something off because it's of the print margins and things. All right, so again, this is probably a little bit. It's sort of in between the good ones and the really bad one we just saw. There's a little bit too much color. There's a little bit too much going on, and nothing is important because everything's important. And I would just say that you need to be careful of color. The one on the left is probably a little bit better than the one on the right, but you just need to make sure that you aren't inundating somebody with too much color because if you do, then you will lose them and it won't look cool anymore. Again, this is for more like graphic designers, so maybe this is a little bit out of the realm of what you're thinking, but don't try for any graphics that are going to be too overpowering. If it's just right, you'll sort of know it and you'll be able to sit back and sort of look at it and be like, just generally proud of it. You don't have to go overboard with this. It's just a resume. Oh God. This is And trust me, I actually like the company that made this Zippy Pixels for this kind of stuff, but this is probably the worst resume yet. And I say this because we're about to look at probably one of the better resumes I've ever seen. And this is horrible. It's not print ready. It could be horrible when it's printed. It's wasting a lot of ink for no reason. It's not even helping because the words are over colors and imagery and things like that. And there's just too much going on. Uh, I there's something cool going on about this graphically, but I hate it as a resume. Just absolutely hate it. Do not do this. If you do, it looks more like a flyer for some sort of I don't know, like an ad, an ad for uh, not not a job. It just looks like a an ad you would see like at an airport. So don't be that person. Just just don't do this. All right, so here's a much closer version of what I think you'll end up with in terms of what your look could be. Um, this is for a web developer, excuse me, but the everything looks pretty much like what we've been talking about. There's a consistency, it's very clear. He chose to put his experience with and his skills at the top, but it's very hierarchical in a way that is very legible, very to the point. There's more information. Now, granted, there's more like a paragraph style in the descriptions of the experience, but that's because that's emphasized that way. And I appreciate this because it gets to the point of what is this about? It's about language. It's about creating something that is, um, you know, that you can read, you can understand quickly, and even without looking at the actual language itself, I can just, it's clear enough that I want to read it. And I think that's one of the things is you want to make people interested in what they're looking at, but not in a way that's off-putting, something that's very clear, very organized, very succinct. And this is one of the better resumes I've seen, just from looking for precedents and examples for this. And I highly recommend that if you don't use this sort of general template, now in the original, just for reference, in the original resume, there is no black border, but I wanted there to be an edge so that you understood the size and the proportion of this. So keep that in mind. This is actually just a white page with a clean edge. And this could be basically the format that you use or something similar for your own resume. So something to consider, very simple, very straightforward. Even though there's a lot of information, it's very clear and legible. So something just to, as food for thought as you leave, build your skills and not your resume. I think the thing that I've emphasized here is the resume is, at the end of the day, a piece of paper that is summarizing who you are to somebody who is looking to make a connection with you. They want you to be that next person, to work with them or to help them in their job or to help them, uh, you know, grow their academic program or whatever. They want you to be that person. And even though you might have a really great personality, you might not have the skills and you might not have the expertise, or you might not even have the educational experience to really thrive in the way that they need you to. So always think about that. If there's opportunities that you can get in your career that will help you build your skills, think about it that way and think about how in the long term all these things compound on themselves and they build up each other and they build up you at the end of the day. So I think that's pretty much it. I apologize. Again, I really am sorry that this did not work out. I'm going to try to send out links uh, to this video, just and notices, and I really apologize. The Google Hangouts was not working when I tried to do this live, so I will definitely try to have backup plans in place next time in case this happens again. But if there are any questions, you can find me at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/evolvingarchitect, or you can go to evolvingarchitect.com. And you know, I just really want to thank you for being awesome. For more professional insight to help you evolve your architectural career, please visit the website at evolvingarchitect.com. I hope you have a glorious evening or afternoon or day, because you could be watching this video in the future. But again, I really appreciate if you've gotten to this point. I hope you got something out of the conversation. And it's been a little bit over an hour, but I think it was really worth it. I really liked where we got with this conversation. And, if you have any more questions or any more thoughts, you can reach me at the website, you can reach me at YouTube, or any other social media that you can pretty much think of. I'm there. So uh, again, thank you. This was brought to you by AIA Buffalo, Western New York Emerging Professionals and Evolving Architect, and we'll see you around. Thank you.